Patrick V, and you're part of the podcast Reimagining Leadership, where I'm focused on helping others find a better way to inspire, empower, and compel those around you to follow your lead. Today's guest is Tom Renehan, who is a good friend and a respected colleague of mine in the coaching industry. And our topic today is around respect and self-awareness as it relates to effective leadership. So let's get into it. Tom, thank you again for being on the podcast. We had an opportunity to talk a few weeks back in what I thought would be a really interesting conversation, which was around leadership, but specifically around the topic of respect. To me, that seems, I'm looking forward to where this conversation will go. But before we start that, I'd love for you to give some background in terms of how you got into coaching in the first place.
Sure, Patrick, and thanks for having me. So I had a very good career mostly in sales and sales leadership. As I started to think about what I wanted to do in the future, post-career, I always thought that I would be a teacher. Over my career, I taught at several different institutions, and I got my master's degree at Wake Forest University, and they invited me back to teach sales management. And I just loved it. I get in the teaching bug at that level kind of bit me, and I said, "Well, this is a lot of fun." And I did it at a couple of other institutions, and I did it when I moved back to New England. Really, really enjoyed it. And I thought maybe that's going to be my teaching, my post-retirement activity, and teach at the college level. So I was on the road one time, and I was reading an article, and it talked about coaching. I got more intrigued in it, and I said, "Wow, people are getting paid to do this stuff." And I had adjusted my style at work then, which I'll talk about. But I started to research coaching, and I looked at certification. And you were part of that research, because if you recall, we sat down and talked about the certification and why that was important, although it's not required in our field. But I felt, and you supported that certification is kind of a point of difference. We went to the same institution, and I remember that well. And I was actually there a few months ago, and I think that was 3 years ago that I became certified. And then the second thing I became certified in it's called Leadership Effectiveness Analysis 360. It's a 360 assessment. And I found that to be a really good jump off point for me in starting with clients in using that assessment. And I've also found it to be very, very true and very powerful for the people that take it, and gives you real meaningful actions for them to change their behaviors. As a coach, and as I said, one of the reasons that I kind of leaned towards this profession was that I always managed salespeople. But about 10 years ago, I realized that I took the sales out of it, and it became just people, and people became my passion, and helping people become better at what their craft was, no matter what they were doing, really became my passion. And that kind of really redirected me and supported myself as a coach. And I texted my wife that very night from the restaurant. I said, in the center of the article, I said, "What do you think of that?" And she said, "This is perfect for you." And so that's how I became a certified professional coach.
Yeah. And I think many of us probably have a similar story. I know my background was in sales and sales training and leadership. And it was always enjoyable to have people that would approach with questions or things that you could do that, right? That you had an opportunity to help them develop. And I think we all probably have that same drive, and then decided just to say, you know what, I want to do this on my own, maybe as under my own umbrella on how I want this to look. And so I think many of us have very similar stories as it relates to that. So.
Yes, and that always excited me. And anytime, you know how it is in the modern job world, is that you don't stay at the same place for 35, 40 years. You have several trips along the way. And I always looked at something different in between jobs. And not that I didn't have many, thank goodness. Had I known 15 years ago what I knew 3 years ago, I think my career would have taken a different turn, probably very similar to yours, where you are at your age, and you built a successful business. And I probably would have taken that turn 15 years ago as opposed to just 3 years ago. Time is good.
Right. And it doesn't matter what age it's at. I think that's the beauty of this. It's not like we're out on a playing field.
That's right.
It's about our physical ability. We can do it whenever. Right. And I do believe that you just over time, you gain more experience in terms of just life experiences that you're able to bring to the table. And it's not that you tell people how they should do things, but it's simply you provide different perspectives. I think that's the real value to it.
And I call that wisdom.
That is wisdom, right? That's right. So as it relates to our topic today, though,
Yes.
what are your thoughts on that?
Let me give you the inspiration for this topic. And this story last week was unfolding in the media about Captain Crozier on the aircraft carrier, the Theodore Roosevelt. And just to touch on it very quickly, I don't want to review the news here, but he was raising the flag about his crew of almost 5,000 people on one ship coming down with COVID-19, and he wasn't happy about it. He ultimately got removed from his command, and the video still chills me when I see him walking down the plank. It's his last act on that warship, and his crew was cheering him, Captain Crozier, and it said to me, whoa, this crew, these 5,000 people really respect this guy. They don't respect him for his title. They respect him for who he is and how he was taking care of them. And so that was my inspiration, because of all the coaching that I've done, I can't think of a time where I was speaking with somebody about how do you respect people? How do they respect you? And this is one, when we think about all of the leadership traits, behaviors, and skills that we talk about as coaches, this one doesn't come up very often. And also what's unique about respect is that it works best when it works both ways, from the followers and from the leader. So when the leader has respect for the followers are going to have respect for the leader. And that's when this works best. And that's what I saw with Captain Crozier and his crew on the warship, the Theodore Roosevelt. So if you think about respect defined, you can get it by position. You can get, I'm the vice president of sales, and by that title, you're going to respect that title. The problem, if you leave it at that, often that type of respect will induce fear within your organization, just because, the vice president here, I can't say this, I can't do that, I got to behave. People get nervous around senior leaders, if you recall that. But if that person shows due respect to his followers or her followers, then it's going to be a different conversation. And that's what I call, as a trait, it's earned respect. So once that leader earns the respect of their followers, it's going to change the dynamic of that relationship.
When I hear you say that, I think there's a quote that I will often recite that says, if your actions inspire somebody to do more, to dream more, to learn more, or to become more, you're a leader. That's it. No title. It's your actions that do that. And to me, what you just said speaks to that.
Yes. And a very wise man that I know says that everybody's a leader. And that's you, Pat. I've heard you say that many times. And that's great. And that's true. I believe in that. And I preach that to my clients, no matter what level.
Obviously, I have to agree with you, right? Because you just cited me on this.
Because you said it.
Yeah. But I do believe that. I think too often we do get caught up in this idea that we need a title to lead. I think it was based on a high school talk that I was asked to give up north. And they were introduced as emerging leaders, these high school kids. And the first thing that I said to them before I even gave the talk was to say, do not look at yourself as emerging leaders. You can be a leader today. And that quite honestly, the world can't wait for leaders. We need them now. That we can't wait for 2 years that you get a title or you graduate or whatever that is. You have the ability to do this now. And that's what we need.
That's right.
I'm with you.
So as I was researching respect, and obviously you have to go to the dictionary and find out what the true meaning is. And it's something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. That makes sense. And then also I pulled out my leadership effectiveness analysis, my 360. And on that, we measured 22 behaviors, which rolls up into 6 leadership functions. And I was just reviewing that just before we get on. And the word respect isn't on that page at all, which really surprises me. But if you look at the characteristics of respect, you become, it's honesty, it's controlling emotions, it's resourceful, it's admitting when you're wrong, It's someone who's driven. It's someone who prioritizes, someone with integrity, someone who's a role model, high self-esteem, someone who's a giver, and somebody who's loyal. Now we're getting into definitions of a leader. So I just thought that that was just a fascinating journey in researching for this topic.
Now, for you, when you go through that list, is there anything in particular that you find more relevant to the work that you do or that you've seen in terms of one being more important than another or more difficult to develop?
Not in the work I do. I think, and self-awareness hasn't come up, but that's certainly another key attribute for a leader, no matter what level, to be able to deal with the respect issue. That, to me, is probably something in the work that I do, the people that I coach, their self-awareness is probably the key thing that we talk about often. And once they get over that, then things start to change when they realize what the impact that they have on people, and they start to lead a little bit differently. It changes the dynamic in their organization. So I find that to be one of the most interesting things as I coach people.
I heard you talk about that list. The one that I know from what I've seen in the past that I think can be the most challenging is admitting mistakes, admitting that I'm wrong. There's a vulnerability there that I think if you're insecure with yourself or your own abilities, it can be difficult for you to admit to, I'm wrong, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer, maybe I'm frustrated, whatever it might be. And I would say most often I see it if it's a group of new managers or leaders, right? That all of a sudden we think like, well, I can't let my team think that I don't know the answers because then they're not going to respect me, where it's counterintuitive that by admitting that you don't know or that you've made a mistake, it oftentimes builds more trust and respect, I think, because they know that you're not full of it.
I was with a client this week, and he's a new manager, and he's getting leadership coaching after 6 months on the job, which I think is wonderful for this organization that's investing in him. His thought process is that he wants to be as good as the people that he's leading. And I said, well, why do you want to do that? And he said, because I have to know their job. I said, but they're the expert. You're not. You're the leader. So why don't you let them do their job? Give them the space to do their job and not step right up and be them or be a super them. And it was an awakening moment for him that he didn't have to be as good as they were at their job.
Yeah, it's a dance though too, right? Because I'm sure he's wanting to demonstrate to them like, I want to know what you do, but you need to do it in a way that people don't feel as though they're being micromanaged, or you don't trust them to do what their job is.
It is a dance, and it's balance. When to step in and help and learn, but it's also the ability to step back and observe and make sure that. And in this particular case, he's a sales manager. Part of his job is training, coaching, and developing. But if he's doing their job with them side by side, he's not observing how they're doing their job. He's just doing it. So he's not seeing the opportunity to train, coach, and develop as well.
Yeah.
So,
do you notice any difference in regards to helping people take on management roles or leadership roles? And where I'm going with this is I think of people that have been successful in sales that can then get promoted to a manager, as opposed to maybe some other field where they're working more with other groups before they take on a management role. I just think, being in sales myself, I know I saw many that were promoted to a manager because they were successful as sales reps, and that was their biggest downfall when they became a manager, because those same skills oftentimes didn't translate over.
and that's the old adage: the best salesperson doesn't make the best manager. And it takes me back to what I mentioned on the open when I taught sales management at the university, Wake Forest University, and this was to graduate students. There were no people skills in it. It was all forecasting. It was all hard sales stuff. So I gained permission to remake the entire course, and it made a lot more work for me, but I had a lot of fun doing it. And it was all people management. And how do you manage people? But yes, to answer your question, to get back to your question, absolutely. The good organizations recognize that. And there's a way to grow a salesperson from, what I call carrying the bag, the feet on the street to before they get to management. Often they go to a higher level where they see a bigger picture of the organization. In the organizations that I've been with, the key account level is often where they learn that before they get to the people management part of the business. So they understand both sides, the lower level sales organization, the account, higher level account side, and then to the people side, and to see if they succeed in that role prior to getting to the management role. But I've seen both mistakes. I mean, people get moved up and they fail, and that is the mistake that many organizations make.
I can't remember where I heard this, but it has always sort of resonated me as it relates to this topic, is that respect is not given, it's earned.
Yes.
Which again strips away the title of this thing, that I don't care what your title is, that it's your behaviors. And I think organizationally, we can say the same thing about respecting organizations. That is, I think of congruence as well, right? Do I walk the talk? And if I don't walk the talk, if I don't have a sense of integrity, organizationally, I think of that, right? We say we've got certain values or certain mission statements, yet if we don't behave in ways that are in line, that align with what we say, then there's a lack of respect there. Right? People don't respect people that don't follow through on what they say they stand for.
That's correct. And there's so many aspects of that to successful leadership. But if the leader is just mouthing the words or repeating the words or dictating what they need to do, instead of saying, how are we going to get there as a team, and having a collaborative conversation, the respect is not going to it's not going to come from the followers. Another overlay into this, and I was on a webinar yesterday from MRG, and they talked about compassionate leadership. And that's kind of a interesting term, because, if you think about leaders, do they think of themselves as compassionate? And their definition of compassion was empathy in action, which I thought was fabulous. And I just love the way they made that very simple. But compassion is a very important piece of leadership. And if you show compassion, much like the ability to admit when you're wrong, I think that is also going to earn the respect of your followers, or just any other individual. It doesn't always have to be a leader follower. It can be your neighbor. How do you earn the respect of your neighbor? How do you earn the respect of your fellow board members? It goes on and on and on. And I think it's a pretty interesting life lesson if we focus more on respect as opposed to just, leadership.
And I would agree. I think the term leader itself really is evolving. Certainly from what it was 20 years ago. I remember one of my first managers in sales, who then went on to become a coach. And he and I would stay in contact. He said, one of the first books that we were given as managers, the title of the book was Intimidation Management, or something along those lines. Just how archaic it was, right? This idea of you need the title and you scare people into going where you want to go. And I don't think it worked then, and it definitely doesn't work now. And I think oftentimes, what do? We blame the generation. The generation today, and we all know it begins with an M, right? The millennials don't want to work. They don't, and I disagree. I will tell you, I've got so many nieces and nephews that are in that millennial space that I don't know any of them that aren't hard workers. They're all charting their own paths. And to me, I think it's more an indictment on bad leadership than it is an indictment on a generation as to why people don't want to follow where somebody else is going. And again, I think we have natural drives, right? If I treat you in certain ways from respect, I can do that, but also it doesn't mean that I'm weak or I'm a pushover. I can do that in a way that we have very clear expectations of how this is going to go. right?
Hmm.
And I think that's the empathy in action type, right? I can remember what it was like to be a frontline leader or carrying the bag, but that
Hmm.
still doesn't mean that there aren't going to be expectations that are going to be held because of that. You can have
Absolutely.
both.
Right. And that's the balance we were talking about. You can still have a good conversation with somebody, how are the kids, knowing the kids' names, knowing the wife's names, knowing what they do, and still have expectations, for that position.
Yeah. And you've probably heard this too. The individual that says, well, I can't get that close to the people that report to me because they'll take advantage of me.
Right.
Or, and again, I think that's an indictment on your lack of confidence in your own skills or your insecurities that create that. Because I know many individuals that lead from a place of connection with individuals, but also they're able to draw the line when there needs to be more accountability or ownership to things. You can have both.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And I think that's the world that we're coming into.
I agree, and you make a valid point about the generational thing. A lot of the millennials I coach, and I enjoy it, and they thirst for knowledge and want to get better at what they do.
Yeah.
But I don't put my finger at them and say, "Hey, you're just a lazy millennial. You don't want to learn." But no, they want to learn, and I want to help them learn. So,
But also, they're not just going to take it for granted. They're not just going to take what we say because of our age or our title. They're going to question. They're going to be curious on stuff. And to
mhm.
me, that's what more could you ask for? I think if more people were like that, we would have more efficient systems in many places.
I will also, to get back to our topic, because millennials could be a whole another podcast, as I'm sure you know. in working with millennials, I typically find that a very deep respect from them to me, which is very humbling as well, because I get calls from not only informal coaching, like relatives and nieces and nephews, like you say, or people that I've worked with, but my current clients as well, and get calls for just an occasional question, and I find that very humbling, that they respect me enough to say, "Hey, Tom, I got a question, and this is a situation." And they got a dad and an uncle and other things that they can go to, but I often get those calls, and I really, really appreciate that.
Tom, knowing what I know of you and certainly our previous experiences, if I were to jump into one of those individuals that comes to you, it would most likely be that they know that you're really listening to them,
Mhm.
which is such an important skill, right? To be able to really transparently listen to somebody else, authentically listen to somebody else.
That's true. That's very true, and a valid point, because leaders often don't listen. And that's another key skill that we haven't, an attribute that we haven't touched on. Again, probably could be another whole podcast for you as well. But it truly a unique trait that takes a lot of practice, and people recognize that as well.
Yeah, it's a muscle. I look at listening as a superpower. That if you really are a strong, authentic listener, so many things become easier, whether it's conflict or, miscommunication getting resolved quicker
Mhm.
because you're present. It builds trust. It certainly builds respect, all of those things.
It does, absolutely.
As we wrap things up here, what direction do you think leaders probably need to focus on most? And certainly in the situation that we're in right now.
I think in our current situation, emotional intelligence, and we touched on this a little bit before we went live, showing your own self-awareness and the awareness of others and their emotions, and how things may be impacting them. I think that is critical to what's going on in today's environment. I've been on, I don't know, countless Zoom calls, as I'm sure you have in the past month or so, Pat. And when they're informal meeting, like a board meeting, I had a board meeting last night, and we start with, "How's everybody doing?" And the leaders who do that on those calls are really showing their emotional intelligence, and it's giving people an opportunity to say, "I'm okay. I'm nervous, but I'm okay," or whatever they're saying, on that call. And it adds time to your day, but that's all right. because I think these leaders on these calls that are showing their emotional intelligence and they're caring for other people and giving them voice and an opportunity to say how they do.
Yeah, I think that's well said and very much needed at this point in terms of that ability to check in, almost that empathy component to it. So with that said, Tom, thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast again, and always enjoy our conversations. And again, respect. I think you've hit it right on the head, how important that is. So thanks,
Pat. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Appreciate
enjoy.
It. You too.
Tom provided some great insight as it relates to the importance of self-awareness and developing respect, that it's not about the title, that respect is something that's earned, and really touched on something that certainly is very important to the work that I do around emotional intelligence, that first component to this around self-awareness. If you know somebody that would find this episode valuable, I'd ask that you forward it on to them. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the podcast. And it would mean the world to me if you would leave a rating or a comment regarding this or any other episode. And until our next episode, I hope you're able to go out there and rise above your best.